Hello, everyone, and welcome to HSS Combat Sports. I'm AJ Smith here. It's my first time doing this, but essentially, this video is just going to be going through the Caleb Plant Resendiz card and just pretty much breaking down every fight, just giving a little bit of a preview. Look to do this for pretty much every card every week, whether that's in the US, UK, just kind of whatever's going on in the boxing world. So without further ado, so take a look at this Caleb Plant fight. Caleb Plant, he's a guy who brings a lot in and outside the ring. I think he's really good at selling fights. We've had situations where he's come to other fighters' fights, running up on people backstage, like things like that. Just kind of brings that. Like he's a guy I want to watch, not only because of how he's going to be in the press conferences and things like that, but also what he's going to bring in the ring. So, I mean, you think about just the Anthony Durrell, I feel like I'm butchering his name, but the Durrell knockout, he's wearing those like Freddy Krueger shoes. He hit that celly. It was, borderline disrespectful, but that's the kind of entertainment you want to see in a fighter nowadays. So, his only two losses coming to Canelo and Benavidez, who say what you want about Canelo, but I mean, Canelo was running the pound for pound just a few years ago. Benavidez is certainly up there now. So having that be your only two losses, I don't think there's any shame in that. So kind of getting him back on track in a sense. So yeah, you look at the McCumbee fight. That was his last fight. Got a win, kind of get him back on track, and looking to probably fight Charlo in the fall. It's just wondering, he's hitting those mid-30s. Does he still have what it takes to be a top guy at this division? I believe so. But I think this fight here is just going to be a step in that direction, and then putting up him against a guy like Charlo, who is coming up in weight. But I do think it's going to pose for an interesting matchup, which is why I think this card is important. So you look at Resendiz, the guy who's 15-2, 26 years old. Had a lot of his fights in Mexico, some more recently in LA. This is a guy who, coming off of losses to Hernandez, Elijah Garcia knocked him out. I mean, that was a good fight. That was definitely a brawl. And then most recently got his early knockout over Paliza. But, a guy who's mainly known for that Jarrett Hurd fight, Hurd being a guy who's unified champion from 2017 to 2019. And he was able to knock him out. So, and that was just in 2023. Even if Hurd was on the downslope, so to speak, it's still an impressive win. This is a guy that's shown to have his ups and downs in the division, depending on who he's fighting. I think this fight is definitely set up for Plant to win, but we'll see how it goes. So you look at, I'm not sure if this is co-main or just part of the rest of the card, but super middleweights, we have Jamal Charlo taking on Lamana. He's moving up in weight. I think anytime someone moves up in weight, it's interesting. I think in the lighter divisions, you look at like 140 with guys like Haney and Lopez, it seems like they're able to move up and get maybe like 2 to 3 to 4, like, easier fights in that division before they start challenging the top guys. But yeah, it looks like Charlo's kind of moving up fast. I mean, I think Lamana, he's going to be very game opponent, but I think this is a fight set up, for him to win, as these go. But, it's set up for him and Plant to both win, and then obviously have their showdown later in the year. But yeah, coming at 6'1", 35 years old. I always like the Charlo twins. I'm definitely more of like a Philly guy. I never really rocked with Dallas and stuff like that. Definitely not a Texas guy myself. But I've always messed with the Charlo twins, and I think when they're on their game, it's definitely better for the sport. I think they bring a lot of entertainment. You look at wins recently. I think Deryevchenko is a very good win. I believe that was a year or two ago now. That's his only problem mainly, honestly. I think it's just been inactivity, whether that's in the ring, outside the ring stuff going on. And then Jose Benavidez Jr., who I believe lost to Danny Garcia, if I'm remembering correctly, my Philly guy. But yeah, I mean, those are two solid victories. So we want to see him keep challenging himself, and if that's moving up in weight. and taking on the likes of a Plant later in the year, I think that, you know, that's fireworks for sure. Looking at some of the rest of this undercard, Yuenli Hernandez and Kyron Davis. Hernandez coming in at 7-0. This is a middleweight contest. And then Davis, a guy coming out of Monmouth County, New Jersey, an area that I'm familiar with, kind of beach area out in Jersey. But a guy who's had some decent fights. He did lose to Benavidez, split draw against Durrell. So you know, this is kind of an interesting matchup here. You know, you got a guy coming in at 7-0. You know, who hasn't been super challenged thus far, coming in against a guy who's very game and fought, you know, some of the top in the division at that, you know, 160-pound mark. And then looking even further, Isaac Lucero and Valenzuela. I think this is kind of a dud fight. I mean, you got a guy coming in at 15-0, 23-0. But you know, it could be interesting depending on, you know, if these are prospects you're into. 15-0 and 23-0. I'd argue, you know, a lot of their wins so far have been kind of padded against the guys, you know, who aren't very game, with not so great records. So glad to see them get the opportunity to kind of challenge themselves against one another at like a similar point in their career. And then one of the fights I'm most excited for is Kermel Moton. He's taking on this guy Remy, coming in at 5'11". Obviously Moton only listed as 5'2". So, you know, he brings this kind of bruiser, brawler style, but he's also very slick. I think that's what I like in a guy like Moton, because a guy like, you know, like a Pitbull Cruz, he's very popular. You know, some people like to watch that style. I don't have a problem with that style, but it's just not my favorite to watch. But I think, you know, Moton can come in and give you some slick boxing ability. So it's just fascinating, you know, because you have a guy who's a prospect coming up, Kermel, big deal Moton. You know, this is kind of the build-up of his record, you know, taking on different challenges. I mean, you know, this Remy guy, you know, doesn't have the best resume here, also fighting out of Vegas. But, you know, you got to get the fights under somehow. And I think, you know, anytime a guy's, you know, 5'2" at a lightweight, you know, he's going to come in and bring some entertainment, you know, and I always look forward to watching him fight. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I got. You know, I think he'll probably win this one pretty convincingly, but it's just the style matchups that, you know, I think he's going to start to bring, you know, more of the casual fans to his audience. And then we got a couple more fights here. We got Carl James Martin and Francisco Portillo. Portillo's, you know, pretty widely unknown. Tried to do a little research on that end. But Martin coming in at 24-0. That super bantamweight division I kind of just refer to as Inoue and friends, because that's literally what it is. You know, Naoya Inoue just keeps piecing these guys apart. I mean, he's had a couple scares, couple knockdowns. You know, a couple guys who are a little bit more game than others, but I mean, he just seems kind of levels above everyone else. But you know, I do like watching the small guys fight. You know, I think about Gonzalez, you know, Chocolatito, those fights, you know, the Four Kings, you know, brought some really entertaining fights. So, you know, I always look forward to when those smaller guys are fighting. So this is a guy coming in at 24-0. You know, and I think this is a guy that's, you know, he's going to bring it. A Filipino fighter, you know, reminds me of, you know, I do like watching a lot of these Filipino fighters fight. You know, I'm not too sure. You know, it's just a slight casual on me. You know, I was pretty high on Mark Masayo, and then, you know, he had his loss or string of a few losses, you know, missteps in his young career. But, you know, I think he has plenty of time to turn it around. He definitely showed that flash and, you know, brought that entertainment. You know, and those Filipino fighters can always bring their people out to support them. So I'm looking forward to checking this one out. You know, got a decent prospect here, and then also just a division I like watching in general. And then at the bottom of the card, or, you know, the main card anyway, we got a super welter with Danny the Iceman, or super middleweight, excuse me, against Kwame Ritter, a guy who is 34, and he did lose to a guy, Khalil Coe, out of Jersey City, a prospect I'm pretty high on. So, you know, this is kind of a middle roads for him. You know, if you win this fight, maybe you can continue, keep moving up on these PBC cards a little bit. But otherwise, you know, at 34 years old, it might be looking a little grim for him. But yeah, this is just a card preview, card breakdown, first video. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to this one, and that is all.